Rescue, which is here locally, and glad you're going to come hang out with us in our neck of the woods. Hopefully you get to spend some time outside. You know, I've been teaching wilderness medicine for over a decade, and during that tenure, I've had the opportunity to talk about a lot of different topics. And sometimes it's because it's something I'm interested in, sometimes it's because there's an established need that other people aren't talking about that. And so one of my friends, Laura McGladry, who's also on Portland Mountain Rescue with me, got me psyched, no pun intended, on psychological first aid. And so more recently, I've become more aware, both personally and corporately looking at my organization, as to how psych first aid is an important component of not only how we take care of patients, but how we take care of each other. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about physiology, try not to get too cranial about that, and then dive into the more practical aspects of stress injury management and psychological first aid. Disclosures, I teach also at the University of New Mexico for the Diploma in Mountain Medicine program. I volunteer with PMR and I'm on the board for the MRA. And I have a small, non-profitable company in wilderness medicine, which if you want to talk about how to lose money and time in wilderness medicine, please come see me for another lecture. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. I want to begin this talk by asking you a question. What stresses you out? This is Ben Swervlow, one of my colleagues from Portland Mountain Rescue.
Are you saying I stress you out?
And I was going to say, Ben, what stresses you out?
Let's say, since you have like a caving photo, confined spaces.
Yes, confined spaces stress me out. And I have some familiar time in confined spaces on this mountain, which have been unfortunate. And I still think about those events. This is a friend of mine, Jason Williams. He's in a cave. It's like 120 degrees. It's hot. It starts off, it's cold, and he's sweating, and he's got an active rescue. He's a little stressed out. He also doesn't like confined spaces. But for everybody, it's a little bit different. Sometimes it's taking a whipper. Any cyclist in the room? A couple cyclists. Sometimes it's that car that you hear whizzing past you. I've had cars brush my elbow. My friend Greg Robinson is here. He rides his bike to work. Probably had a few encounters with a car.
Been hit.
Yeah, been hit. And sometimes it's an avalanche burial. That guy does not look like he has a good airway. And cars with bikes. There's all kinds of things. But before we go into stress response, I want to say that suffering is an individual thing. I was listening to this great thing on NPR, which I just tune it on sometimes, and something pops up. I'm like, oh, that's kind of, I'll use that in a lecture. How we all experience suffering or trauma is a unique thing. And the way this was a Jewish historian was talking about suffering is that you can't look at my friend Ben and say, Ben, you've only suffered 13% of what Greg Robinson has been through. Because really it's a unique experience for each one of us, and some of that deals with our prior history, our mental training, our physical training, and so it's what may be stressful to you, what may psych you out, for lack of better words, is going to be different for the other person. So just consider that both for yourselves, your teammates, and then our patient population. But stress response is normal. Everybody's going to have some stress response to some sort of stimuli. Sometimes it's acutely, and other times it's delayed, and we'll talk about the nuances of that as we go through this talk. But it's perfectly normal, and the background of what's going on, what we understand is going on, and I would say that our understanding of stress response is probably still in its infancy, but it's a fairly complex process, and so we'll look at that process without getting too cranial. I will read you a textbook definition just because I think it helps us kind of delve a little bit deeper. Stress is a process of interchange between an organism and its environment that involves self-generated or environmentally induced changes that, once they are perceived by the organism as exceeding available resources, disrupt homeostatic processes. So we're going to talk about disrupting homeostatic processes. That's our lecture. Do you guys remember this? Who was in the lecture earlier this morning about stress and response in the environment? Really complicated slides when you start looking at this, but briefly going through this, here's the stressor, and then here's how Bob, Joe, or Sue is going to be perceiving it. And then we enter this pathway of coping, and that's the lens of how we see our worldview and our environmental view of what's going on. And how are we coping? What are our coping skills? Are we going into hostility, avoidance, exposure management, praying, or maybe something more productive like problem solving. And then that sort of sets our pathway into these physiological responses in the autonomic system. We'll dive deeper into that. But what happens immediately with the sympathetic response, what's happening later with parasympathetic stimuli, and then some of the maladaptive, adaptive, but then later maladaptive responses in our steroids and catecholamine releases. Now, everybody's in some sort of medical school here, PA school. First years, raise your hands. Okay, second through fourth. Okay, great. So something for everybody here, and if you don't know a lot about these responses, you'll know more than I will in the next 6 months. But to keep it at a level that Pearce can understand, we're going to talk about this in a real simplified construct. I'm going to divide the brain up, like you heard this morning, into the 3 different systems. The neocortex, which is sort of our higher order executive function, deep thinking processes. Your limbic system, where your emotional, hormonal responses are taking place, and then your brainstem, your survival instincts. I just touched something hot, I pulled my hand off because it was hot type functions. And in order to think about that, we're going to build a little house. This is one of the teaching points of a friend of mine, Laura McGladry, who, if you want to learn more about this, she wrote a great chapter in Wilderness EMS, 2 chapters actually, on psychological first aid and stress injury management. I would encourage you to take a look at that book as a textbook in wilderness medicine. But so we've got the roof of our house, where the executive function is taking place in the neocortical system, the limbic system, which is sort of hormones and emotional responses, and the basic brainstem functions. Can you see okay? I'm trying to stay anyway. And so what are those things? We have speech, attention, our memory, our problem solving, in the executive function. Down lower, a little bit faster acting than the executive function is the limbic system, which is modified by your hormone responses, where pain and pleasure, anger, fear, how your body's interpreting those environmental stimuli. And then the more immediate response of the brainstem, which is, like you heard earlier this morning with the adrenaline rush. How many people raise their hand for the tingling fingers and dry mouth? Those things are happening at a lower level with parasympathetic and sympathetic interactions. Now, what you're going to see as we talk about this is that these 3 areas of your brain are interacting with each other. They're sending signals and functions to each other in that lens that I showed you on the first slide, where these different responses are affecting one another. So how does this environment, how does the mountain environment, how does the wilderness medicine environment lead to stress injury? Well, as you heard from some of the other lecturers, even the helicopter lecture, there are different types of stressors. We all interpret them differently. It could be the environmental factors. Anybody here from southeastern United States? Anywhere? Oh, how about California? All right, California. What's different about this than California?
This is so cold.
Yeah, she's got the little bunny hat on.
Yeah, I'm not adapting well here.
So, yeah, environmental factors, physical factors. Right now you're all like copacetic, sitting on these cushy couches and watching some bald guy lecture. It's a pretty calm environment. But the physical effort of doing mountain rescue, particularly if you have the burden of responsibility for other people's lives besides your own, plays a toll on you. Long-term management, or being out in the field for a long time, limited resources. We just redesigned our first aid kit for PMR, and everything, Portland Mountain Rescue, everything we're carrying is in a little tiny container about this big. And what I try to teach people is that it's not what's in between this kit. It's what's between your ears that makes the difference in managing things in the wilderness medicine environment. So keeping that brain at a higher functional level is going to be what really helps us be effective for our patients and for our teammates. Other factors, variable team. I really like Ben. Ben and I get along well, but there are other people who maybe I don't jive with quite as well in our team dynamics. We don't have the right chemistry or whatever that is, or maybe I don't even know them. They're just brand new and I'm new to them, and so the trust factor is not there, or the terrain. I am, let's see here, I'm 43 this year, 43, just turned 43. And I don't climb like I did when I was 23. It's been a gradual change, but there's just things that I just don't do anymore. And I'm okay with that, but when you exceed your comfort levels and you start to Hey, Ellen. Stressors, you begin to have, increased effect on your stress levels. So, incident command. Do you remember the talk earlier when we were talking about the incident command structure? A lot of times you may not agree or line up with the leadership structure that you're sitting under, and yet we still have to lead and follow. So those are other stressors. What I've been talking about are sort of overt stressors, things that are directly a result of the environment or the situation that we've just put ourselves in as mountain rescuers. So limited resources, trauma, the environmental factors. But there are covert stressors, things that each one of you in this room brought with you right now. This is, we're in January. I don't know what happens in med school in January. Is it like step one, step around the corner? Starting new semesters, new classes, maybe you're starting a new rotation. You're like, oh my gosh, I did not want to do urology, why am I, or psychology, you wanted to do, you're a surgery resident, you want to do this or that. And there are things that we bring to the table that are just uncomfortable for us, things that we don't look forward to. Maybe it was the GI distress that you had yesterday, that you're bringing that with you up on the mountain today because you've just got to be there. It could be that your spouse or your partner is angry with you. And I can't tell you what those home stresses do to affect your performance. When I'm training for the mountain, one of the things I do is I can't run up to Mount Hood every day. I ride my bike a lot. I ride 3,000 to 4,000 miles a year. And one of the things that affects me when I'm bike racing, if I've had like family stress, or if my wife says, "You've got another bike race?" And I always say, what is the right amount of bike races per year? Does anybody know the answer to that question? It's N plus 1. So, but when she asks those questions, or there's some other stress, my kid has some problem at school or whatever, those things are sitting on my heart, and you can just bet that I'm not going to win that bike race. My brain is on some other planet thinking about some other issue. And when we are in a rescue environment, those things are affecting us as well. So we're bringing life back in Portland, life back in Seattle or med school or wherever you're from, you're bringing that with you. Okay, so we talked about the stress response is normal. We looked at the different parts of the, let's go back to that. The different parts of the brain that are being affected. And I love this picture. Emily showed, I think, this earlier, with the parts of the central nervous system and the sympathetic, parasympathetic change. You've seen these things happen when you study your pharmacokinetics and how people dilate their eyes and constrict their eyes. Same things are happening here with our stress responses. You'll see dilated and constricted pupils. You'll see dry salivary glands or sweating, profuse sweating for no good reason. They're sitting there not moving, but they're sweating. The other things that are happening that are more physiological that are going to affect our rescue is how the heart and the cardiovascular system responds with drops in blood pressure, rises in blood pressure, tachycardias, increased breathing, and tachypnea, and then the adrenal responses that sustain all of that. So those are the things that are hidden in that slide that we looked at earlier. And what happens when these things prolong, or immediately we have sort of an anxiety, we can have anger, we can have these are some of the immediate emotional responses, and as these things prolong, we start to have other things like doubt, hopelessness, and cognitive impairment. I really want to focus on those as we get into the care of these types of patients. So some of these delayed responses also include anger and depression, not caring, guilt over a situation. You heard our helicopter lecturer talking about his guilt over leaving that dog behind and wanting to go back and get this dog, but being sort of commanded that he had to leave the scene. We carry the nightmares home with us from different rescues. I'll tell you briefly about a rescue I had up on Mount Hood. This is 4 or 5 years ago now, where a gentleman had fallen into the fumarole, the gas vent, a tunnel that was about 60, 70 feet deep. And I happened to be the person who went in the hole to go get this guy out. And he had 16 fractures, he was 60 years old, and I still think about that event. Well, 1 year later, another person falls in the same hole. The holes, it changes weekly throughout the season, and it was a different configuration, different set of injuries. But being that same guy who went in the hole the second time, I was still thinking about the first event, and I still carry that with me. The stressors of that first event were still something that were in the forefront of my mind. You know, the gases, the confined space, and I carried those through. So we'll talk about what that exposure looks like as we sort of build up on what's going on physiologically. So these are sort of the inward things that are happening. Outward, I have a few listed here, but there's a lot more as far as maladaptive responses and behaviors. Anger, irritable, explosive. Have you guys seen somebody at the end of a shift or coming out of a long stint during the residency, and the fuse is short? You know, everybody's aware of this. This is normal life stuff. But there are also other problems in that lens that we looked at in coping, where they begin to have maladaptive responses. Some of those short-term things might be just, you know, withdrawal, not exercising. Who likes comfort food? Comfort food, okay. Poor dietary habits, you know. If I'm studying for an exam, it's probably going to be pizza, you know, or a burger. And I'm trying really hard to be a vegetarian, but man, those burgers look pretty good sometimes. And so, you know, our compromises in just self-care become more prevalent when these stress responses are beginning to overwhelm us. And I think as I talk about that beginning to overwhelm us phrase, it's very important that you take away from this lecture that stress injury occurs on a continuum of injury. So there is normal stress response and then a spectrum of maladaptive response. And so that's a really important takeaway point on stress injury management. So looking at that spectrum, what do we do when normal becomes abnormal? You have the immediate normal response, and then something happens where that injury, that exposure goes home with you. It becomes the short fuse with your family. It becomes the decreased work performance the next day. It becomes the maladaptive bad habits that you begin to pick up as later on. So there is a link between this stress injury and later parts of life, and we see that both from a physiological standpoint with cardiovascular and immune response and neurologic responses. In the people talk, you know, people talk now about cortisol responses and adrenal responses and long-term exposure to just adrenal surges, and we see the effects of that. If you look at a lot of your firefighters and your police officers who are constantly barraged with these adrenal surges, we like to make fun of donuts and police officers, but there's, aside from the fun that we take in our conversations, there is a real long-term effect of all that chronic cortisol stimulation. And so that's not to be discounted. And then maybe here get cold sores? Come on, somebody here gets a cold sore. There was one person. My wife has a cold sore right now. And so can't kiss my wife, which is really hard. But you know, when we are going through stressors, whether it's environmental or work or mountain rescue type work, those things begin to take a toll on us over exposure, where we see a decreased immunity to things. So that's also an effect. From an emotional, cognitive standpoint, we have the depression, the anxiety, avoidance of triggers, and then some of the behavioral disorders, and we talked about the short fuse and absenteeism from work. So, looking along the lines, I have to use an example to kind of drive home the point. I want to get in your face and I want to scream, but I'm not going to do it because you look really awake. Avalanche! Okay? And that's what I normally do in this lecture, and somebody jumps out of their chair and everybody laughs. But what happens when that surge comes? You know, when you lose your footing and you go down and you think that you heard a whoomp. Did I hear a whoomp? Ben, did you hear a whoomp? Was there a whoomp? I heard a whoomp. Maybe they're just going to take out the whole building. We should all run. This is not good. I'm going to die. You might die. We're all going to die. Watch out. So what happens when that stimuli happens? At the executive level, we're perceiving it, we're aware of it, and very quickly it starts to send down the signals from the executive level to the limbic system and the brainstem. Sympathetically, what happens when you're scared? Somebody tell me. She's having palpitations. Okay. It's not for my good looks or my lecture. Okay? Yes. It is, you can have palpitations. You have that sympathetic surge, your adrenals kick in, and you are ready to do what the limbic system and the brainstem are causing you to do simultaneously, and that is to run or to fight. To fight for that air pocket in your avalanche situation, to run from the bear, to get out of the way of the car. And then what happens? You're starting to process this more, and the longer you have to think about it, these things are happening, and you're thinking I'm going to die, and wait a minute, I haven't died yet. Am I still going to die? Did the helicopter really crash? Am I burning? What's going on? And your brain is having continued exposure to the stimuli, and so we see that this chronicity of exposure gives the executive system, which is a little slower to respond, more time to process it. And what's happening that we see is that this imprinting of stress injury begins to make an imprint in our brain that carries with us when we go home. So maybe I'm thinking, gosh, I hope that's not me, because if that means Ben's going to pull me out, I'm going to win some bad award at some banquet at the end of the year, saying that Pearce got buried in an avalanche, and that's really embarrassing because no one wants that award. And maybe it's even worse than that. Maybe I actually am going to die. But either way, processing this and time to think about it has not been a fruitful endeavor. And I'll talk about why that's important as we look at other ways to mitigate stress injury that have been tried in the past and maybe not have been as good for us. So, all right, so it's not an avalanche. It's fluffy unicorn kitty. And I'm like, whew, everything's okay, everything's fine. My parasympathetic system begins to kick in. At the hormonal level, I'm starting to calm down. What happens to my little flutters? They're getting better. My pupils begin to change. My system goes into recovery mode. Maybe anybody had a situation like that where they had an adrenal surge and then you just felt completely wiped out afterwards, and all you wanted to do was just go take a nap? Very, very common response. That is the all clear type function. And so that's a really great way for the body to return to the homeostasis. And normally these systems work very well with the sympathetic and parasympathetic system bringing homeostasis and restoring normal function, and we go on about our days and we go back to our shift in the ER and everything's hunky-dory until it's not. And then that exposure happens again. And those executive imprints that we had before, we recall those, and now we're responding even faster because we know that this could be real, or maybe it's not, but we don't know how we're going to respond. And so there's the repetitive trauma over time begins to overwhelm our response system and our ability to process this. And some of the long-term effects that we talked about were the helplessness, the despair, the lost hope, the absenteeism, the maladaptive habits, and we get ourselves in a bad situation. So just to sort of drive home where the stress happens, the sympathetic system is beginning to have the effect on the body, and these are the systems that long-term and short-term are going to be affected. So your heart rate, your heart system, your coronary disease that you see long-term and certain populations of people with high stress loads, your perspiration, the blood flow to your muscles. Anybody got an ulcer from med school right now? Okay, I was on Nexium for years, and PA school is one of the hardest things I ever did. But I'm off Nexium now, and I'm really grateful for that. But it was not because I was eating bad; it was just stress. And so those are some of the side effects that we see beginning to happen with long-term exposure. So as we live with that, even though we're not in the scene anymore, we live in a sort of hyper-arousal state. And we've seen the sort of the caricatures or patient scenarios that people are talking about, the fidgety PTSD type person who can't sit still, he's afraid the bomb's going to go off next to him. Those type of pictures, that hyper-arousal state. We sort of use the Vietnam veteran to talk about that person, but that hyper-arousal state can happen for anybody, for paramedics, for patients on a mountain, for rescuers, for providers. And then what are some of the things that they're experiencing? Let's say you were attacked by a dog, okay, and it was a really bad attack, multiple plastic surgeries. You decide you're never going to own a dog. You hear barks, and your system goes into overdrive. You're waiting for that next dog bite. Dogs biting bikes. Yeah, so the thoughts, the smells, the sounds, the emotions that happened at that event, certain triggers will remain there imprinted, ready for your body, because it wants to defend itself, to be ready to defend itself the next time. And so there's that permanent emotional response and physiological response that happens. So what I've just talked about and our response system, this is not new stuff. Okay? People have been talking about this for decades, and the Armed Services came up with this program called the Combat Operational Stress First Aid, or COSFA. And they looked at how do these long-term effects affect my ability to operate. Because it's one thing for me to go home and, like, you know, I may not be a great husband when I get home, or a great father. I may not be a great provider when I show up for the next shift. And those are all really important parts of my life. But in the military, we need to know, is this person going to be able to squeeze the trigger, or pull me out of the truck, or do whatever it is that military people do. We can ask Will Smith, he can tell you all the military duties that people need to be in the green zone in order to do. So it's a really important question, and so when they came up with this, the questions are, where are you today? Are you optimally functioning? Are you available to adapt to certain situations, or are you not able to adapt? Are you trained and prepared physically and mentally? Are you motivated? Are you calm about the mission we're going to go out and do? You know, I can remember a lot of missions where I'm like, hey, this is going to be fun. Like, I'm not at work. I'm out in the snow with my buddies, and we're going to go rescue somebody. It's going to be a great, and it's bluebird skies. This is awesome. We're going to go have fun rescuing somebody. And a lot of times, it is fun, until it's not. And so, as you're looking at the spectrum that we talked about, of where you're at, and whether it's a military standpoint or you know, doing rescue work at a civilian level, there are effects of, remember, the covert and the overt stressors that we brought with us. The overt things are what the situation is right now, and covert is what we brought with us when we showed up at the mountain that day. And are we having some transient distress, you know, whether it's a physiological GI bug, or, you know, my wife yelled at me, or I forgot to pay my taxes and it's April 20th. You know, what are my current stressors, and how am I processing them? Am I motivated, or is this like the third rescue we've done this week and I just need to get back to work and do my regular life? How am I doing with my sleep? I'm sure you guys are aware of how your sleep has affected your test performance and your grades at school, but also it affects your athletic performance. And let's go back to that. And so, and this moves to the entire spectrum of, can I do the job, or am I beyond, you know, functional? Am I a liability for my team? Am I going to be able to be helpful for them, or am I going to cause more problems and I should just stay back at base, or stay home? So, Portland Mountain Rescue, we looked at this, and I talked about Laura McGladry joining our team and helping out with this, and we include this now in our SARGAR discussion. You guys, were you here for the SARGAR? Part of things, a little card, it's green, amber, red, and where are you at in your readiness to go do the mission? And they looked at all these different functionalities that people had for how do we feel about the mission? How do we feel about, you know, Greg's on my team, and Greg's the leader for the day. Am I happy that Greg's the leader, or you know, Ben's going to do X, Y, Z, and he brought this equipment. Is this the right equipment for the job? So it's a leadership question, it's a mission question, it's a physical fitness question, and now we've included, you know, where are we in the green, amber, red aspects of our mental health? What things do we bring with the mountain? How do we feel about this mission? You know, maybe it wasn't the best gig for Pearce to go into the second funeral after he'd already been in one. You know, I probably didn't talk about that enough at the time, but maybe that wasn't the best decision. Maybe it was the right decision. Maybe that's exactly what he needed to do to have some closure on it. But those are the types of things that we need to go over, and so we include that in our discussions. And we sort of summarize this kind of somewhat busy slide into something that's a little bit more readable and fits in our breast pocket. So from a step 2 standpoint, and naming and doing multiple choice questions, you know, it's helpful to, you know your ICD-9 codes and what are we actually talking about, and all this sort of loosey-goosey language about emotional, touchy-feely stuff. That's what Pearce would say before he started talking about psychological first aid. A lot of the stuff that I'm talking about You know, I work in surgery, and a lot of the things we do are very definitive. You cut, you sew, you fix, it's broken, now it's better. And coming from somebody who came from that background, it was very hard for me to get in touch with the softer sides of medicine and the parts of how we function that are, I can't see on an x-ray or necessarily on a lab result. Maybe I can measure cortisol levels and things like that, but it was a lot harder for me to process that. And so one of the best psychology lectures I went to, there's a CME company, I'm blanking on the name of it, but they do this big CME conference at Harvard every year. And we went up to it, and the guy gets up and he grabs the lecture, and he has this very thick Indian accent, and he says, "This year we have 4 more diagnoses for the DSM-5." And I'm horrible at my accents, but it was very good. And I'm waiting for the punchline, like, why is it really important that we know this diagnosis, and how did it differ from the other diagnoses that were out there? And he said, because it helps with patient billing. And so, why, you know, it's helpful for us, not so much for patient billing, but to classify things so that we can organize them in our brain as providers as to how to treat these patients, and what do they actually need, and where are they at in the spectrum of injury. It's okay.
But he was serious? That was his answer?
What's that?
That was his answer?
Yeah, well, that was one of his answers. It was the chief point of his answer. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Oh, there you're up. You're back on.
Yeah, so
He wasn't trying to be funny, though.
he said, because we can give a pill that makes them more functional members of society, because we can categorize it, and because we can bill for it. And so, and the treatment for those things that he was talking about, it was the same pill for the 5 other things in the same category. So it was an interesting way to look at things, and he had just finished his fellowship, and I was, you know, I took what I don't remember what the diagnosis was, but I remember how he talked about it. But so what I want to talk about now, in regards to stress injury formation and psychological first aid, is what are some of the common things that we would classify and see if you had the opportunity to regurgitate information on some multiple choice test in the future. These are the things that you might want to know about. So acute stress disorder is defined by 2 components. Objectively, there's been an exposure to a traumatic event that involved either an actual or threatened risk of death or injury, and then also the patient's subjective response to it. So it has to have the objective and the subjective components. Now, I have a teenage daughter, and objectively speaking, sometimes what she perceives as a threat and how she subjectively responds to it might not match with how you guys might perceive those things. And remember what I said, that stress and suffering and injury is a very unique individual experience. We all experience this differently. Emily, how many times have you climbed Everest?
Just once to the top at 3 expeditions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of time above tree line, way more than me. And I'm going to experience things in the mountain differently than she has. You know, I've hung from helicopters, but Will has really hung from helicopters, okay? And he's going to, you know, process rotor wash and the sound deficits. You know, I'm acoustically impaired. I wear hearing aids. You know, I have different ways of experiencing the world around me than Will does under a helicopter or Emily does above tree line. I work in cardiac surgery. That's way different than nephrology. If you put me in front of a dialysis machine, I wouldn't even know what button to push. Okay? But we all experience and process, you know, stressors and obligations differently. And so I want you to keep in mind that the objective and subjective components may not always be as clear to you, but they are certainly clear to that patient. Then, so they have 3 types of symptoms, and all 3 of those must be there. The one is they begin to re-experience the traumatic event. They have the avoidance of stimuli associated with that event, and then sort of that persistent physical arousal, or we said hyper-arousal. Those are the 3 components. And if you remember our talks in the spectrum of things, those are the 3 things that are very common, and this is a name for it with an ICD-9 code and a way to bill for it. So acute stress disorder. But the component of this that you want to remember when we compare it to other labels, diagnoses, is the time criteria. It's right here at the bottom, but it has to last for at least 2 days, but no more than 4 weeks. Okay? And so all 3 symptoms, the arousal, the experiencing of the event and the persistent avoidance of stimuli, sights, sounds, environments, people associated with that event. If Will and I had a bad experience on a helicopter, and I'm having acute stress disorder, or let's just say some stress injury, because I'm not really big on labels, but let's just say I had some stress injury related to that event, one of the things that I might do is avoid helicopters, okay? The sound of helicopters. Helicopters come over me and I'd run for cover. Maybe I avoid Will, because being around Will, as much as he's a nice guy, I don't want to be associated with somebody who is a tag to that event. And so there are a lot of avoidance, and then re-experiencing the traumatic event. How does that happen? That may happen in nightmares, that might happen in talking about it with other people. And remember, that's for how many, more than 2 days and less than 4 weeks for acute stress disorder. So PTSD is all of those things I just said, but lasting for more than 1 month, okay? And we've talked a lot bit about PTSD in the literature, especially studying the Vietnam population. We do know that there's a relationship between some people are just set up for having stress injury formation easier than others. 30% maybe due to genetics. We do know that childhood trauma, so this is, oh gosh.
Just hit a button like that.
Yeah, we'll see.
Just
Uh,
hit the
yeah.
Will your
keyboard.
keypad?
No, it's not. It's the HDMI cord.
Okay.
It should come. And my screen is like blinking and going nuts. Okay.
Huh.
Anybody here from tech support?
They just told me wiggle it, and it
Yeah.
was free. What you're doing is
You just, my screen is. Okay. It seems to be in this little interface between the cord and the dongle. Okay. Well, let's try this.
Do you want to play with it while you talk?
Yeah, that'd be great. If you could just jiggle that until you see something.
Yep, no worries.
Just don't, maybe not kick it.
Yeah, I'll try my best.
So, genetic components to PTSD, exposure to childhood trauma, previous trauma before deployment was a great predictor of PTSD in the military population. Let's see, it's like not.
I know, it's real close.
And for the case of the Vietnam veterans, if any sort of Asian or Japanese American family.
Do you need a different dongle? I have a.
I think it's the wire. We need a different HDMI cord is what we need, if you can find one. But we'll just, so, that's a bummer. Maybe? No? Okay. Well, I'll just talk and forget about slides. We need slides. So the question comes up, whether it's acute stress disorder or PTSD or name the diagnosis, what are the things that we can do about it? And that's why you're all here. Psych first aid. Just needs the HDMI stimulus. But some of the things that have been done in the past are critical incident stress management, or CISM, or critical incident stress debriefing. Have you guys heard that phrase before? No? Anybody heard that phrase? I know these guys have. Really common in the mountain rescue population, really common in police and firefighting populations. These critical incident stress debriefing scenarios were basically, maybe, is there another HDMI in the box? They were a time, I want to say kumbaya, because that puts like the wrong picture of people's heads, but it was, picture a campfire, we all went through an event together, we sit down and we all tell about the event from our own perspective in sort of a round robin to help us process and move past the event, is the idea. There's no, there are some tenets of CISM or CIS debriefing that when it was originally concepted had some other sort of principles behind it. Some of those included like problem solving, like what could we do better, or they would be facilitated by a certain facilitator that may or may not be involved with the event. So you guys are from Snohomish?
Tacoma.
Say again?
Tacoma.
Tacoma, right, okay. So Tacoma, just up the street, sort of. They hear about this event that PMR went down. We dropped a helicopter on the mountain, which we've done that before, and they want to come down and help us process it. So they send their best CISM person to come talk to us about it. Now that's actually probably a good setup, okay? You've got mountain rescuers who are part of the MRA, and we speak the same language. We probably know each other from different events or whatever. Just call me Hitachi. And so anyways, they send their best facilitator down to talk to our rescuers and help them process through that. And maybe in that scenario, that might be a helpful enterprise. But if you go look at the literature, particularly anything written by Brian Bledsoe, CISM has actually been found to not be helpful, and that reliving the stressor. Remember we talked about as far as exposure and arousal and stress injury mitigation, what are some of the side effects that we're reliving the event? And so now we're going to go voluntarily sign up to do this thing where we're going to go relive the event. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And so, and as it turned out, it didn't make a lot of sense when they looked at mental health survey scores and cognitive impairment and all these other things that were happening after the exposure to trauma. Turns out that the people who had more severe PTSD were the ones who were going through these debriefing scenarios. So enter COSFA and other opportunities to look at stress injury formation, and CISM began to fall out of favor in sort of the late 90s. And so, see here, I'll read through this. It's detrimental to healing, worse outcomes, didn't reduce PTSD, no short-term risk reduction as far as like suicidal ideation and those types of complications, and increased risk for PTSD at the 1-year mark in their survey scores. So, okay, so we're talking about maybe that's not what I want to do. What are some of the things that we can do? And these are sort of practical steps that, if you thought about it, and I ask you to write down some things about how you cope and what you do to get through a scenario, you might come up with some healthy habits like mental rehearsal. Okay, I know I'm going to need to tie this knot at that spot, so I'm going to practice this knot. I'm going to go practice that knot in a group. We're going to talk about it before we go. All right, this is my first time being a leader. I know that I'm probably not going to do everything perfect, so I should get myself ready for some sort of criticism. You know, that some people are going to be evaluating me and telling me what I did right or did wrong. Or maybe I'm going to do great and all my teammates think I'm fantastic, but the media is going to get hold of the event and they're going to tell me I did something wrong. And both of those things are possible and do happen. Maybe I'm going to, after the event is over, back to town, I just can't sleep. I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to go get on my bike. I'm going to go lift weights. I'm going to go do something completely mindless, not related to mountain rescue. I'm going to cross stitch. I don't know. Name some other type of non-related activity. For some people, it involves prayer and meditation. Some people, it just means getting a good night's sleep. Like, I just need to go sleep this off and move past it. Those are all sort of healthy habits, preventative measures that people go through. To get a little bit more specific and institutionalize some of those healthy habits, what can we do corporately within our own groups? Number one, incorporating stress injury formation into our discussion on SARGAR. So as we talk about the green, amber, red before we deploy into the field, and how are we doing with our mission and our equipment and our leadership structure, and how clear is the mission, how are the weather, how's our physical fitness, and how's our mental health. So just asking that brings an awareness of what's going into the field with you. If I'm a leader and I want to know that Joe Schmo, his wife died, or his dog died, or his brother died, or he's just sick with the flu, I want to know what he's bringing out with him before we go into the field, because that's going to affect not only him, but also the entire team. So incorporating psych first aid into your SARGAR discussion is really helpful. I'm going to talk about this other corporate entity that is a good pursuit, but I don't want you to get it confused with critical incident stress management or stress debriefing, and that is after action review. Okay, and this is not reliving the event and we all go around in a circle together and talk about it. It's saying, okay, what are your names?
Ashlyn, Faith,
Ashlyn, Faith, and
Sarah.
Sarah. Ashlyn, Faith, Sarah, Pearce. So we just finished this mission, and it was at Abbey, and we had one person survive. Go team. Alright. But we also had a body recovery. Okay. And so, and it was that person's. So we've checked them in, we turned them over to the paramedics. But before we separate, do you guys all have a ride home?
Yes.
Doing great. And how are you doing? Like, do you have enough food? Do you hydrated? This is what the team leaders should be doing. Checking in. And I just want you guys to know, you all did a fantastic job. I've never seen somebody dig a hole that fast. And you could probe like amazing. I've never seen somebody probe that fast, that deep. You found that person. If you hadn't found them, I don't think we would have made it through it. So great job. I know that everything didn't go perfect as planned, but we did our job. We did it well. And I know we'll talk more about all the nuts and bolts of the rescue at that meeting coming up. But I just want to say before you go home, you guys did a fantastic job. Do you have any thoughts for me? Anything I did wrong?
You did great.
That's very nice of you. Well, if you think of something, I wanted to get better. But thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting this family. I can't tell you what I know you know this because we do this together. But what you did today for this family and for the community was a huge save. So thanks for being here. If you have any thoughts when you get home and you want to talk about any of the stuff that happened today, or if you lost some gear and maybe I've got the carabiner or my harness or something like that, let me know. We'll get together and chat about it. All right. Thanks a lot. So it's very organic. It's very simple, but it's checking in on their basic physiologic needs, getting a little bit into the emotional health of how they're processing things. Now, 90% of the time, they're all going to tell me they're fine. Okay, but I promise you, we've established a connection as peers and colleagues that they're going to see that the door is open and that they can reach back out. And I dated this girl in college once that used to leave things in my car, and it was a tactic so that we could make another conversation, and it was really good. We didn't get married, but we had a lot of good dates, and so sometimes that carabiner that went home with somebody else is a great segue, and that's just like one tool in the toolbox to think about as a way. I lost that. Has anybody seen my red handkerchief anywhere? If you guys get home and you see a red handkerchief, would you? It's sentimental value. I've had kids made it for me. If you see that, would you let me know? And then maybe I'll call them. And say, hey, still haven't found my red handkerchief. Have you guys seen it? Oh, by the way, how are you guys doing? Okay. Good. Okay. I'm glad. Yeah. Thanks again for being there. That's after action review. That's not. So tell me what you felt about it, and how do you feel about it, and tell me how you feel about it, and then what things did you fail on, and what things can we do better? That's not the time for that. The time now is saying, this is over. You did a great job. Thank you for being here. It's closing the event, and when people leave the event, they just get in their car, tired, hungry, sleep deprived, and drive home without having that sense of closure where we are bringing this page, the end of the chapter, and that story is over, and we're going to move on to the next event. For a lot of people, that stays open, and they don't process that as well. So allowing for some closure. Other things that happen is that it builds up group cohesion. And so it brings that unity of the team, even when there is some disparity of some decision-making in the field where there's a leadership issue or how we tie a knot issue or whatever the issue is, how we manage that patient issue. When you circle back with each other and have that after-action review, it acknowledges that there can be differences, but we still have group cohesion. And I think that's really important. And then aside from the after-action review, just training before the event happens. So, like our helicopter lecture mentioned earlier, good training for helicopters and patient care doesn't happen at the time of the event. We learn from the event, but we should be learning and practicing and training before the event happens. Tacoma, you guys probably have a gazillion hours every year, like most MRA teams, and training for every type of scenario in your environment. You understand the epidemiology of what type of patients they see at their location. They're going to train for those types of people. We never trained for fumarole rescues on Mount Hood. We never had one until a few years ago. Now we've got a protocol. Now we've got special rescue techniques, and lots of people not sleeping at night developing a new way to tie a knot going into a hole. But we've got it down pat now, and what that has done is, whether we ever have that rescue again or not, we've built resiliency. And with stress injury formation, one of the things that you can preload the system, I work in cardiac surgery, everything's about preload. Well, you preload the system with building up resiliency, both in your technical prowess and in your mental health. Because if you go into a situation with confidence that you already know this and you have trained for it and you're ready for it, your risk for stress injury formation is already reduced. Because that feeling of loss of hope and despair and what am I going to do has been mitigated beforehand. So it's something to think about that. Plan for the stress, plan for the criticism. So I can't get this to work, but I'll just show you this. All right? See? Guy in the camera? What I want to talk about in stress injury, in psychological first aid is what are some of the principles? What we were talking about before were all healthy habits, after action review, building up resiliency, but what are the tools in the toolbox for psych first aid? And what came out of the military was two different groups was the 5 C's or the 5 P's, and those are great ways to, I love acronyms, they're all great, except when they don't make a lot of sense, okay? So if I was talking about the 5 C's, and one of them was bring a cooling blanket, okay? Well, and C is for cooling, right? But maybe it's for B for blanket. I don't know. So acronyms have to be functional. And so we found that C's and P's weren't as useful because it was like some sentence, and somewhere hidden in that sentence was a C or a P. And we just weren't making a lot of sense of it at Portland Mountain Rescue, and so we came up with our own. And thanks to my friend Greg, he came up with the acronym SKETCH, as in, I don't want to get sketched out about this one. So, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are. But as you can see in the little great diagram that you would be seeing on the screen, it talks about safety, calm, that's the K for calms, acronyms have the problems, self-efficacy or group efficacy, connection, and then hope, establishing hope. So we'll talk about some of those things. And remember I showed you that card that had the star bar over here for how we prep before we go in the field with stress injury formation and knowing where we're each other at. We also have one for what we do when we're in the field. And it includes the acronym for SKETCH. And it's been really helpful for us. And I think Doug McCall, I think it's Doug, up in Seattle, has taken our card and helped reformat it. So a lot of the other MRA teams and rescue teams are using this. But this tool is not just for rescuers. This is something that you can use in your shift in the ER when things hit the fan and you've got massive, large group triage catastrophes, and you've got to figure out what to do and where it's going, and it's chaotic. What am I going to do? So let's remember we talked about safety, calm, efficacy, or let's say engagement, connection, and hope. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those. See if I can get to the right slide. Okay, so there we go. Come on, one more time. Great, safety. So Ashley, and Faith,
Yeah.
and Sarah. I bore you guys for seconds. This is what happens when you sit in the front row. So you guys are going to come over here, and our patient Bob is right here. Can you just stand right there? Okay, and I want you to stand really still because there's a big serac behind you, and I don't want that piece of snow and ice to fall on Bob, okay? So you just stay there, and Bob, do you see these big, strong rescuers here? They are, you are in a safe environment, Alan. They are protecting you, and I'm gonna work on your, leg fracture, and that's gonna be fine. We're gonna take care of that, but I want you to know that you're safe now, and we've got this shield between the problem and you, so rest assured. Thank you. So we actually did that. We made a human shield on the mountain one time where this husband-wife team got tangled up in the ropes. They're at the bottom of a cliff, and we really can't move them. He's got a hip dislocation. She's got bilateral tib fibs, and they're in a wound-up piece of dental floss as they tumble down the mountain together. So we built a human shield. We took all the bystanders we could have, which is a great way to manage resources and keep people from interfering. And we made this big wall of people, and they were fighting the snowballs coming off the cliff. And what that did, we were talking about psych first aid back then, but what it did was it created a shield. It reduced the chaos for the patient. It made them look up and say, wow, there really is a wall of people. I'm not going to die from a snowball today. And so it reduced the chaos for them. Anybody know what a bothy bag is? A couple people. How about a tarp? People know what tarps are, right? Okay. It's like a tarp. And so one of the things I like to do is to reduce the chaos and make a shield, create a sense of safety. Remember, we're on safety. Is I'm going to take that bothy bag or that tarp, and I'm going to throw it over, and I'm going to take care of the patient. And when I've done that, is I've created a microenvironment that I can address the patient that they are not seeing the chaos around them. They're not seeing the mortality that's 15 feet away from them. I'm there now, and we've created a microenvironment where I can take care of just them. And that's super helpful to create that sense of safety. Even though it may not always be the most safe environment. And we have to acknowledge that, but we've made it safer. We've helped, remember in the how we perceive things, we are creating a perception, hopefully real, okay, but maybe not perfect, that they're going to perceive an increased safety, and their stress injury formation is going to be mitigated by us creating a sense of safety for them. And then redirect the attention. So, what do we have here? Matthew. Matthew is from, where are you from, Matthew?
UW.
UW, okay. Here, I'm going to go. So, Matt, I want you to just keep your eyes on me, and everything's going to be okay. But what I don't want Matthew to see is the giant bear behind him. Okay? So, what you're doing is one of the things in creating a sense of safety is just redirecting their attention. Now, the bothy bag does that, but you don't need a tarp or a fancy tool. You can just engage with the patient. And thank you. So that's redirecting. And then the other sense of safety is we may be in a bad environment. We may have some compromises in our actual safety, but I can. Not everybody can find the silver lining in a cloud, okay? And sometimes you have to dig really deep to find something to be positive about, especially when you're already stressed, okay? But what you can do is you can say, Eric, I know that your leg is broken, but you know what? You've got one good leg. That's really, I'm so happy for you because I'm going to help you hobble out of this. And you know, you ever seen the fireman's carry before? Me neither, but we're going to figure it out. And I'm going to help you get out of here. We're going to use your one leg, okay? So you show them the evidence. You give them a piece of evidence as to why they are safe or why they've got something good going for them, okay? That's creating safety. Now, if you remember me holding my laptop up and showing you this little circle of things, the next element is calm. Well, creating safety is feeding right into the calm. Okay, as we're creating safety, we are helping them develop a sense of calm. And if you remember our leading up to this point, in the model of sympathetic and parasympathetic stimulation, we want to reduce that sympathetic overload. We want to try to help reduce the arousal and bring down that adrenal surge, bring down their heart rate. You only have 5 liters of blood. I don't want it pumping out in the snow. Okay, we want to reduce that heart rate and get them calm and save that physical reserve because they may need it for a prolonged extrication. So, how can we create calm? Will, calm down. No. Calm down. You got it? Not like that. Okay. It takes a personal gut check because you may not be calm. You may be and probably are super stressed. This is a difficult situation, and you've got to create that happy dance for the person that they are perceiving calm. And I wish you could see the slide of this because I've got this great picture of the calm down guy, and one guy saying calm down, and then you got the patient saying, "I thought I was going to die, but now I'm really going to die." And so find your happy place before you can get into the patient's face, and then create that happy Zen environment for both of them. And that comes through breathing techniques and controlling your vocal patterns, your intonation, just simple, clear speech. You know, if they don't want to hear, you know, Faith, I really need to reduce your sympathetic overload, so I want you to calm down. Okay, if I told that to a patient, they'd be like, sympathy, what? Okay? So you want to use simple, clear speech, just like you're talking on the radio, speech that people understand. And then this one I have a little asterisk by, because I normally have to lecture to this. One guy's a little compromised in this area. But that is personal touch, okay? So I did a little fist bump, a little shake of the hands. Personal touch can go a long way in bringing a sense of calm for people, except when it doesn't, okay? So you need to know, you know, having that idea of your patient, say you have like an autistic child that you've been called on a rescue to go reach out to, and touching that patient may not be the right thing, and loud noises may not be the right thing. So knowing the patient ahead of time and trying to create a sense of calm based on where that patient is at is really important. And then if you are a person of prayer and you know this person to be a person of prayer, prayer and meditating through a trauma can be really helpful for people as well. So we talked about safety, we talked about calm, and then the next one is efficacy or engagement. E for efficacy or engagement. I like engagement because it's a little bit easier, you know, simple brain here. I like to be able to think of things that are, you know, able for me to recall. Okay, I want to get them to engage, both in the group and then in themselves. And this weekend, you guys will probably see some litters. You might even make some rope litters, okay, things like that. One of the things that we did on PMR was we have our litter. You carry patients in these things out in the wilderness. Sometimes you put them on helicopters and cliffs and things. And one of the ways we used to tie people in was we left a long tail on our bowline. Bowline is a type of knot that you use to attach the rope to the litter. And those tails had some purposes, but one of them, those purposes, was to give the end of that rope to the patient. And they say, here, your job is to hold on to the end of this rope. Now, talk about white-knuckle death grip. They thought that that was going to be the end of them if they let go of that knot. They're tied to that litter in 1,000 different ways. They're not going anywhere. But they can't look down and see all the different ways that they're attached to the litter. But they know if they hold on to this, they've got a job to do. And that their job is to hold on to that end of the rope. Now that might be a real simple thing, but it could be like, hey Bob, we're going to be here for a long time trying to get you out of here. In fact, it sounds like the helicopter's not coming till morning. So I know you've got some diarrhea issues and we're going to take care of that, but we all need to work together to get this shelter built, build a snow wall. So here's a shovel and we're going to work together on this. And that's called group advocacy, group engagement. What this does in stress injury formation is you're creating not only some cohesion and some identity with the team, but that generation of group identity helps them to say, I'm not alone. And I can do things to make myself better or to make the team better. And when they do that, they don't have that loss of hope. They don't have that feeling of isolation. They recognize that I can participate in my own rescue. And that goes a long way to decrease and mitigate stress injury formation. So we've talked about safety, we've talked about calm, we've talked about engagement, both personal engagement, holding the rope, or group engagement, helping the group out. And some of the language I use in that group is like, hey, Greg, you're one of us now. We are deputizing you. You are now part of Portland Mountain Rescue, and we're going to give you a job to do to help us all get off the mountain together. So you help build that collective identity, and they no longer see themselves as Joe Schmo, the guy who broke his leg. So that's another one. Connection. Remember, all these things are happening in a circle. They're all happening organically, simultaneously, and they're repeating themselves. I show that little picture of the little circle because I want people to think about these techniques. These are just tools in the toolbox. This is not the Bible. This is not like some black and white thing that has to happen in some order. But they are all happening organically as you're talking to the person. And I hope I can demonstrate that in these little micro discussions. But the last one, or the second to last one in C is connection, building that connection. Now, you can argue that all of these things that I've done in talking and engaging with people is trying to build that connection, but it happens when you shake the person's hand, and you introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Bob, the rescuer, and I'm going to be taking care of you, and is it okay if I take care of you? And maybe you give some credentials. I'm Will Smith, and I've got every wilderness medicine certification known to man. Okay, and then you build up their trust. But just making that personal connection where there's a lot of people running around here, and they're all here to help you. But I am your personal attendant. So if you have any need, I don't care if you go to the bathroom, you need some water, you've got some increased pain, just call Pearce, and I'll be right there. Okay, it's kind of like that James Taylor song. You got a friend. You are engaging with them, and you're building that relationship. You try to find commonalities. So, where are you from? Spokane. I've been through there once. Man, did I have a bad experience there. I hope that our experience here today is better than what I had there, because that was really bad. But here, we can get through this. Okay? So I've made her laugh. I've made a connection. I've talked about how what we're in is, this is processable. We can processable. That's not a word. We can get through this together, and then we try to find some commonalities. And one thing that I might do is this sounds a little silly, and if it's forced, it's going to feel really weird. But I try to use their name a lot. California, where are you from? What's your name?
Emily.
Emily, my name's Pearce, and Emily, I just want to tell you that all these people, when they heard that Emily was on the mountain, we were like, oh, we're going to go get her. We're going to bring her home. So Emily, we called your family, and we told them that we found you. We know where you're at. Be a few hours, but we, your dad Bob, he was worried about you. We said, hey, Emily's doing fine, and she's got her dog with her, and the dog's fine too. And we got her warmed up. She's getting some food, and he said, Emily really likes candy when she's distressed, so we brought you some candy. And did you want a piece?
Yeah,
I've used her
definitely.
name 7 times. Okay, in 4 minutes, I've used her name 7 times. Mostly organically, a little forced from the lecture, but you can see that engagement and the name use of the names can really build up that relationship, and we're establishing trust. When I was talking to, Sarah, thank you, and I talked about what my role identification was as far as I am your personal attendant. All these people are here for you, but I am especially here for you. I've identified myself as I'm the go-to person for her, and so we've established that connection. That's all really important in the environment. That's important in the ER. Okay, that's important when you're rounding, when you see a patient, you talk about who you're going to be, is establishing that connection. Because, Friday I'm going to rotate off service and start nephrology. Well, I may never see Miss Smith again, but when you establish a connection that I'm going to come back and check on you later today, people begin to look forward to that. They know what to expect. And it's those expectations and having them that help mitigate stress injury formation. Last one in the connection phase is, and I talked to this with Emily, is reaching out. So I reached out with Sarah, and we talked, and I shook my hand, and that's a different type of reaching out. What I'm talking about is removing ourselves from the environment by reaching out to the outside world. So I told her that I talked to her dad, Bob. I said, Bob was concerned about you. I know that Bob's your dad, so there she sees we've had a personal connection outside the world. We're going to get you a sat phone so you can talk to him too, because we're probably going to be here for a few hours. And I know he'd really like to hear your voice, okay? By allowing her to connect outside of the realm of this injury and this trauma, she is now herself removing herself from the event and from the environment, and allowing herself to have less formation of stress and stress injury. So that's super helpful, allowing them to connect to the outside world. One of the other ones is pets. Sometimes pets can get in the way of an injury. But if they are there, it's great to engage them and have them with the person they belong to. The two of them will be better served if possible. So just consider that. And I've got a great picture of my dog, which would be great for the slides, but you can't see it. All right. Hope. Remember when I talked about safety? You got a question?
I just want to point out we're a little bit over time, so if anybody is getting really hungry, they can go, and the rest of us can hang out.
Give me 2 minutes for hope. I hope that you can hang on for 2 minutes. Okay. Outlook is everything. So you've created safety, connection, efficacy, all of those things, but you want to try to find the positives of the situation. That happens with all those other steps, but focusing on the positive and reminding them of the hope. This happens both for the patient and for the rescuers. When they were leaving the scene, and I can tell them the avalanche is over, the patient is safe, we're going to move on to our next rescue, our training next week. They are now looking forward to the future, not dwelling on the past, and we've established a future hope that's coming that may or may not be as significant as you want it to be, but you're looking forward to that as a technique to help them have something to grab onto that's not the actual event. Okay, so safety, calm, connection, engagement, or efficacy, and hope. If you can remember those things, they're just tools in the toolbox, but just know that mitigating stress injury formation is going to help yourselves, your teammates, and your patients from leaving the scene at the scene and being able to be functional and less impaired going forward for the next rescue. So, thanks very much for your time and attention.
What was the lunch last time? Sandwiches?
I did that for the good. Oh, that'll be easy.
They're heavy gases, so they tend to lace along different.
Yeah, cool.
Will you share your slides with me? Because there's a lot of those, like the references and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was at last February,
Yeah, there's so much-
and we were
it's funny
wandering
'cause I-
around, and the only thing I knew was that I was on an
Quotes and
acupuncture
all
with
this stuff, and
people,
they're, like, they're always
and their
books
rating
that I'm like,
system,
God,
it
I'd
said
love to read
that,
that.
I know.
Like, oh God, I should read that, you know, I'm like, when?
Yeah, exactly.
This is
Yeah.
the
Figuring it all out
Yeah.
when we retire.
Yeah, right, exactly, when is that?
And
When we get retarded?
that's
Yeah,
one
yeah,
bottom.
we
This is
can't
from the
walk.
surface.
Yeah, Ian's a great example.
I'm
So-
in
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
hole.
just-
the only way
gas
to
pedal and goes
fall
faster.
into that is here.
And nobody's holding, Army's not holding
And
back
slipped
anymore.
and fell like a
I know,
golf
yeah.
ball in the hole.
It's hilarious.
So,
So those fumerals
Thank God
don't
he saved-
move around
he saved
under the snow, and then you go through like the
Is that-
crevasse,
He didn't
it's
drive
literally
through
like you
the
have to go into the hole where the hole is.
Mhm.
yeah.
Dude,
They're,
what
they're
time
not,
did you get
I
out?
mean, they
Yeah.
change the size of the hole based on how much hot gas is coming out
Supposed to
of
with
them.
it?
She's in
And they
Portland.
mature
She stayed down there.
over the season,
Yeah, he
so
said he was
covered
gonna
by
come down
snow.
here last night, but he
And
was.
then,
So there is a point where there's like a little bridge that you can.
No.
So he just decided to do that.
So, and some people will mistakenly call it a crevasse, but it's not a
This morning
crevasse.
we drove home for an hour and a half instead
Did,
of
did, so do you
Yeah.
take air down, or you just monitor your
That's
own
the key, is
oxygen
just kinda
saturation
balancing all
and
that
were able to
stuff
see what's
Right,
going
well, then he's flying around.
It's a long,
Yeah.
very well-attended committee
Yeah.
that's
But-
developing our systems for that. It's a
Okay.
combination of all.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean,
We
you're
don't
home some, aren't
measure
you?
our O2
Yeah.
sats
Yeah.
going in.
Yeah.
That's something we have to talk
Sometimes
about.
it comes in
I think
waves.
primarily because we're
Yeah.
wearing gloves
Yeah.
and
You're
monitoring
probably working a lot
oxygen
more.
saturation,
Oh,
so it's
gone.
challenging.
Right. So, yeah, it's,
But we
What about your Army
we're
stuff?
different
Is that-
gas that
Is that
just
mitigate,
reserve,
and
like,
then we scrub out,
one weekend a
the
month
sulfur
or-
dioxide.
well, I'm what's called IMA, so individual mobilization augmenting. So I'm not with a TPU or Acute program unit, so I'm not attached to like a combat support hospital like
Got
I
it.
used to be. So my schedule is much
It
more
varies
flexible,
from
so I don't have like the tied to the drill with the unit.
Oh, good, that's good.
So I pretty much,
Yeah.
like with my boss is doing, so like
And
in
and we have
next week
limited
is
experience with data,
we'll
for a
get
couple
fly
of years
down
now.
there.
To work.
In AMSP, National
Oh,
Association
yeah, oh,
of
good,
Units.
yeah, that one.
Really
Oh, yeah.
interesting.
So, yeah, I
That course should not
basically,
be used
like that,
Yeah. I
Contox
know.
back in December, the casualty was
Nice.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so he's great about all the guard
thanks.
stuff, things that I do to cross
Yeah, I
pollinate
didn't
all
get to
these
like
different
cognitive
silos.
behavioral therapy
He's
or
all for that.
Who,
EMDR therapies,
oh,
but that's
aside
fine.
from that,
Like,
you should do
the
it.
main thing is to get the
This year.
tools in the toolbox.
I'd like to, or at least parts of it.
What is it?
It's after psych first aid is happening.
April, July, August,
Um,
October.
Okay, yeah, I just
Cognitive
need to
behavioral
take.
therapy is
Okay.
six
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
six
because I'd love to get my
steps,
dip,
and
especially as I'm doing
they
stuff
use it
with
for
high,
everything
more
from weight
high car.
loss to
Yeah,
trauma.
I just need my form, I just need to send it in, that's the thing,
Yeah, you guys, what's for lunch?
I filled it out like a year ago. on
Yeah.
the computer.
It's,
Yeah.
it's back in.
I was just talking to Ian about the fluid
Cool, thanks a lot.
resuscitation.
Thanks for the talk.
I know, we've been like picking
Just
away
like-
at that for like 5 years.
And he's like, yeah, so I guess Justin's doing a little bit, so I'm like, yeah, it's like
How are you guys
for me and kind of think
Well,
we can
Good.
Right,
three of
we've
us
all
trying
been,
to kind
yeah,
of push it up.
I
the
was
girls'
thinking about
side.
that today too, when he was talking, I was like, God damn.
Well, I was hoping to just like get like a
I know we should
I'll
make it
work.
skin
happen,
session
I
in,
got a little
you
extra
know,
time
like
right
check
now,
my mountain
but,
legs out. I've
yeah,
been
it
doing
was
a
so
lot
funny,
of
'cause
like
we, I mean, it has been 5
new
years.
Yeah.
I
workouts for
think,
my legs this year.
probably.
Probably,
and,
yeah.
And core body, because I
Time just flies.
cycled.
Yeah,
all
it
the
sounds like
time. I
Madigan
didn't
might be
realize
looking for
that I was neglecting my
fix
core
some
as much as I
stuff.
was.
Oh, cool.
I was
Yeah, that'd be good.
back pain and SI joint
Yeah.
problems, and so I've been doing a
Yeah.
lot of therapy.
It's good, just a little more travel.
And I feel
Yeah.
super strong.
Yeah.
I think I've been
I'm
home
doing
3,
box jumps.
Oh, wow.
just
maybe
to
4
my
days.
fall
Did
off.
you get good
6.
flight miles in last year?
But
What's
anyhow,
that?
You
I
get
wanted to go
good
test
flight
my
Oh,
miles,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
You know, I
we're
think
gonna
I
go 50
missed
back and see how
Delta
fast
Gold
the
by
bar
like
can go.
1,000 miles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I don't know how much better.
It has a
it is.
speed record for.
Yeah, I got like United 1K.
Oh, did you?
They're
From Timberline.
highest.
Yeah, I'm gold,
Running
I'm
the lift line.
silver, which is
And,
nice.
but
Because they
somebody got it
kind of
for
split
like-
me between the two.
Oh.
If I were all with one, I think I'd be.
Yeah, see, that's what I
Like,
just
you
try
know,
really
you
hard
get
to
that
do, is get it all
notification
with
that says,
one.
"Oh, sorry,
Because
you stole your course record."
Oh,
And
I mean, I think they're all the same. I mean, I think the
I think I'm
protocol.
gonna try it in the summertime.
Yeah, maybe.
With
I
like
feel like Delta's a
nothing
little
on me.
bit nicer.
Like,
Yeah.
just
Like I'll
a
fly an
little-
extra hop.
Little tiny path.
Because
just
when I
bam,
fly to
summit.
Sioux Falls,
And
it's an
you
extra
have to
hop.
have a
like
perfect
this.
day.
Yeah.
with, like,
And I think it's just,
To go for it.
like for me, it just ended up being
Nick?
United.
Maslin?
Yeah.
Because it's
Best
denser.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
I'll do it.
Delta's,
Yeah.
He's
Salt Lake, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
It
difference.
was like a lot of
Yeah,
my
I think we
DC
should,
stuff
like,
is all
test
kinda
out
United.
Denver, oh yeah, that makes sense, it's kind
what
of.
is our
Yeah.
time.
So then I'm
Because
just
I'm
gonna,
like
I've
40
got
minutes to
all the miles
Silkhouses.
with them, so.
Not quite as fast to Palmer.
Well, Alaska,
Like
Mhm.
almost
so
50
many,
minutes
I
to
have like
Palmer. And then like
300,000.
Oh, wow.
from Palmer to
And
Summit.
probably
an hour.
100,000 Delta.
But I know that's
Probably
where the rest
100,000 if we
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know I can be faster than that.
It's
Like,
amazing.
It's just,
Yeah, just save them up till you get, retired.
So what happens?
Oh, yeah, and then I
I
have
got
like
there and like I
With
couldn't
help.
even see the
Mhm.
door. I was like,
Diamond.
turn the light out,
Yeah.
50 mile
I
an
do
hour.
Marriott.
I'm
So
sitting
do,
there,
yeah, people
and,
one or the other, but they put.
Eventually,
oh,
Rob
Sioux
shows
Falls
up.
Yeah.
And we was
You can
coming,
always
so
points,
I
yeah.
called him and he said, oh,
Yeah,
I'm just
that's
pulling up.
crazy.
So we sat in his truck and
Amazing.
pulled in and I
Mhm.
came down here.
Those are nice perks.
Yeah. The
What's
goods
that?
and bads of travel. So.
I know I was scheduled
Yeah,
to
well, he,
go to
got
Australia
before P.
in early
Margaret,
December
Mhm.
and climb number
I
7
think they were
and then
going
go on a
above
dive boat
Timberline
on the
to
Barrier Reef, and that was all rural. Yeah, I mean,
I should have
Australia.
Yeah.
That would have been better.
There
There
is
is snow at Summit Ski Area. I didn't even.
I might go next summer. I think you can, there's diving like the whales are around in like
Yeah.
July or.
And that ride through the
So
trees is
maybe
pretty
I'll do
nice.
that. I gotta ask you, what do you
They
think
got
of
the
this?
tenantry last night.
You know, I think it's a little suture abscess, like,
Because the snow
and it's
skates was,
been there and it
completely
like,
covered, and
you know, like it was
Yeah,
worse a little bit, it was like I kinda
Mhm.
de-roofed it, there was a little bit of pus, like, you know, like a milliliter of pus or something like
Is
that.
it a permanent?
Maybe a week ago.
Um,
It's supposed to be dissolvable. I had one pop out at this end that was
Yeah.
about
there's
this
supposed to
long.
rain something.
It was there for a while and then I just pulled it off.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Anyhow,
I think I should, I mean, this has been, it's also super, there's a tender, it feels like there's a sliver in there or something. There's like a sharp,
Like a little piece of the, still needs to be
yeah, there's
dissolved
a,
out.
there's a piece right here I can feel, like it, like it feels like a sliver.
Mhm.
It's that really sharp thing and then right here. But
Yeah.
you don't think I should worry about that?
I wouldn't do that right now. I mean, I'd let it kind of just work
Yeah,
itself out.
okay, I've been
I
like.
mean, unless it's,
fucking-
get it huge, I mean, soaking it.
Yeah, well, and then, see, I have a sock over all the other day too. Trying to get it. Like, I just wanna make sure the docs that you treat yourself is
Yeah.
full filtration.
I mean, just watching that register, just make sure that's just local information and not.
Yeah, I mean, it's been there, it's been maybe 6 days.
Job Pearce.
Yeah, hey, nice
Yeah.
job, Pearce, are you going to lunch?
what's that?
You gonna get around?
Yeah, I'm supposed to do like some wound care stuff.
Oh, that's right, cool. Yeah.
Well, this is Greg Robinson. And
Hi. Hey, Greg.
Dan Swartzberg.
Will, nice to meet you.
Emily.
Yeah,
Howdy.
hey there,
Yeah.
how's it going? Hi, Greg, nice to meet you. I like your sketch.
Yeah,
Yeah, right on.
Thank you.
Absolutely,
Yeah, I like the sketch thing, that's good.
Yeah.
It's, it's, you know, as a doctor, I'm awash in mnemonics, and my brain doesn't really work that way unless it makes sense, like serene.
Yeah, that's all good stuff.
Yeah.
You know, serene, which I teach,
Sure.
and I use it. and
Similar
it's
lecture
in
for
my
us in
head,
Tetons.
and- But then sketch, I think I could see that, cause I
Like MRI ladies
end up
from
like training people to do rescue
Colorado.
stuff, and that's a good way to
Thanks, yeah.
just put it all together.
So
Yeah.
he didn't mention a T, but I wrote engage them for each.
She came to get
Oh, there you go.
Engage
them.
Yeah, cause that's the thing about
She-
mnemonics,
she-
is they have to make sense
Yeah.
to me.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they're
Absolutely.
like,
She told me
oh
she-
yeah,
So.
somebody's coding the H's, and it's like, what? You know, it's
Right,
like,
right.
because it's just like,
Helps you know where to start, where do
Yeah.
I start?
yeah, like
High
sketch,
functions.
it's a bummer
Yes.
that the slides wouldn't go. Nice job of winging it without the slides. It's a bummer because you spend a lot of time putting
Yeah.
the slides together.
And it kind of glides the audience kind of through what you're talking
Oh,
about.
yeah.
Well, because you have to front load all of the physiology
Uh-huh.
into, because it's kind of, I mean, for what I normally talk about, it's kind of fluffy. Like I
Mhm.
normally do like altitude or
Yeah.
hypothermia or
Mhm.
something. And
I liked your physiology.
But I mean, this is the right group to do the physiology with all the students and things like that. So I
Right.
mean, they
Yeah.
can, deeper dive.
I did like 2 slides of physiology, and I'm like, yeah, fuck you guys. Right?
Right, well, yeah, slides happen.
Yeah, no, so you got through everything. So.
Yeah, you winged it.
So one of the things I heard was, like actually take tape and put it on the patient's forehead on the layer, so that everybody on the team knows the patient's name.
Yes, that is a great
Yeah.
idea. We should put that on our head shield.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good
how's
one.
Bob doing? Bob, you doing okay?
Yeah.
All right, Bob, great.
Yeah, and then just like everybody in the team,
Just
hey
make
Bob,
sure you
my
change
name,
it for the
well,
next
team,
one.
so it's just so like identifying yourself as that primary patient caregiver and
Yeah.
making that connection.
Even when you have, like, I've been on a mission where we were waiting around for a helicopter and probably could have just gone out, but anyways, it was a spot where we were gonna transition the care provider, because like, I'd been on the patient for like 5 hours, and it was just like, my brain was starting to get numb, and I'm not as sharp, so somebody else took over, and just identifying, okay, I'm gonna leave you now, and go, organize ropes, and Sue Ellen is in charge now, and so she's gonna stay with you for the rest of the mission. How do I come up with these fake names, but.
Sue Ellen.
That's
You know-
like, that was a Dallas thing.
Yeah, or a Mormon name, where they put them together, Heather behind iron, Mormon bird.
Yeah.
So well, kinda. But I was on a rescue once
God
that,
can't see what the hell.
yeah, they can't, it's true, I know, they all had a Jackson to drink.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you guys are Mormon, I live in Mormon, so it's okay. I did a rescue with a woman who was kind of absconded, and
Yeah.
we called her Carol or something the whole time because it said it on her coat, and it was somebody else's coat. So we're all calling her name like 50 times a minute the whole time. It wasn't her name.
Oh,
That's
man.
funny, right?
And she just lets you do it.
She was nonverbal.
Oh, okay.
She was like status epilepticus,
Okay.
kind of. I mean, she was having some. So she couldn't speak. She's like, "You guys, my name is Margaret."
Tell status back.
It's so funny. But it was like, yeah, it says Carol on her coat. And we're like, oh, Carol.
Yeah.
How old are you? Good to know.
My daughter's 14, going on 20,
Okay.
and my
Going
son
on
is
20.
11. He'll be 12 next
Okay.
month.
I thought
So.
they were my son's 14, daughter's 16 now.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I don't know
boy.
how your daughter's been, but mine has been quite the handful.
Mine's luckily been
Do your kids have smartphones?
Yeah.
No?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's been a source. So I just found out, so my daughter's use of smartphone, how much screen time we have is huge. She's super connected with her friends, and they all just hang out and FaceTime with each other. They're not even
Yeah.
looking at each other.
Yeah.
No,
The phone was looking at the ceiling, and I'm like,
they're
"Oh,
doing
this
things.
is Bob." I'm like, Bob is a ceiling, and it's but they like to be in the same room with each other, so they do this FaceTiming thing, and I couldn't figure out why my son's screen time was working and my daughter's wasn't, and the allowances kept changing, and I'm like, there's no way she knows this password, and she hacked her password. She figured it out.
Oh, wow.
Do you know that if the kid turns on screen recording on their phone, and then you put the password on their phone, they just memorized your touches?
Yeah.
The little devil, she figured it out. So
Wow,
I'd,
that's a little bit.
it's
devious,
conniving.
though.
Yeah,
That's
it's
a
super
little bit
devious.
Concerning.
Yeah, it was very concerning. So anyways, now she's in a state of shock because the ropes have been tightened down.
Oh, dear.
That's how love has begun.
Yes, and, thankfully there's no cell service here because I'm not getting any text messages for more time requests.
Oh, wow.
So because you can control it remotely, you just push a button and it gives them another hour.
Or you can control it too, you just say, we will not grant any more time.
Well, I said,
Don't
part of
ask.
demonstrating self-control is demonstrating the ability to budget your time wisely. And if you need your phone for homework, like you say, then maybe you should have screen time where you're putting your makeup on. I don't know. Or not wear makeup.
So you do enforce it?
I wish that my wife was more of an enforcer, but it's
On you.
it's shared, but I don't like being the bad guy.
Oh, I know, it's so tough that you got to. I don't know why.
Somebody's gotta help them. Can I carry that for you?
No, I appreciate it.
All right.
Appreciate the offer.
Sure.
I'm used to it. Yeah, who are you, who's the enforcer?
Lockwood's been pretty good. When it comes down to the hard stuff, Janice defers to me. So
Really?
just because.
Bring in the colonel.
Yeah. Because Zach doesn't listen to her much anyway. But
his kids they're unusually good. Yeah, they're
I
unusually.
cannot complain.
No, they'll be in prison within a year because they've spent all their good kid time. I mean, they're in prison.
That's why I'm worried about Allie when she goes to college, because it's like,
She's like,
so good right
she's
now.
such an angel,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
When there's no constraints, then, I'm just hoping, or maybe naive, but she'll do good.
Yeah, I think,
I will say that whatever you're an expert in, emergency medicine, whatever it is you do, you're just dad to them, and you don't know jack. Like you don't understand this. I'm like, okay, I don't understand anything.
When
The
my
answer's
dad-
still no.
my dad was a doctor. When he retired, my brother got up and said, when I was 8 years old, my dad knew everything. He was the coolest guy in the world. When I was 16, I knew he didn't know anything. He didn't know anything. He wasn't very cool. And he's like, now that I'm whatever,
Yeah.
I realized I was right the first time.
That's good.
That's
cool.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, luckily I'm so cool with my kids, I think, so.
Well,
They like
I
my
mean,
stuff.
you are Will Smith.
Oh, you got a green one too.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Did you get your inauguration into the club there?
Oh, in the.
Yeah, you need one.
Oh, nice. I'll take it. Yeah.
Pearce, did you get yours?
What's that?
Your cool club bracelet?
I didn't get a cool
Your
blood
swim
bracelet.
strong. He apparently has already done that.
Oh, have you?
Yeah. Well, he's got 2 goods.
All right, I'll be over in a sec.
No, don't you know they sponsored this? They did
Yeah,
that.
Seattle Spring Band.
Seattle Spring Band, swim strong.
Oh.
Do you know if they have their laptop available?
Someone is bringing a laptop.
Sweet. There was, it sounded like there were some technical issues with this one, so I wanted to make
So
sure
we
we got
want
it.
you in the projector?
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure we got it running.
Okay, so we're going to do it here for right now. Do it off here, and then, so that's your stuff.
Yeah.
Gonna be over there.
Sure.
We could do top floor, bottom floor, or we could do whichever side. Isn't it just beds up there?
No, that's a
pool
hangout,
table.
it's a hangout space.
Hey. Well, Craig Wharton.
Hey, Craig, oh yeah.
From your medical director course.
Oh yes. Yeah, how's it going?
Good, thanks for coming.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is,
Did they scratch up some travel money?
yeah, they were able to kind of get a little bit for me, so yeah, that was perfect, so, yeah.
Yeah, I had like Emily Pearce came out 2 years? No, wait, last year, I think.
Okay.
I ended up having, I couldn't ask her to pay for her travel, so I ended up paying out of my pocket for
Oh, really?
her.
No, they got some fun from the University of Washington to kind of bring out.
Yeah, we just had our board meetings, we were talking about, like, I don't know who they ask or how they solicit, like, big names to come.
Uh-huh.
But I go, I mean, it's gonna come down, someone coming from the East Coast,
Yeah,
it's a money issue, I mean, it's not cheap coming to Portland.
no,
Flying, you have to fly.
yeah. Well, I've got to, like, get home Sunday and leave for San Diego for NMSB on Monday morning, so that's kind of why I'm flying. But, like, the timing of this is always, like, right with NMSB.
Yeah.
So basically, I have to balance it all out. So. But
Yeah,
it's such a...
I'm going Wednesday,
All right, okay,
yeah.
cool.
Are you doing like a medical director's course or?
I'm not this time. I'm doing a talk on National Park Service with Drew Harrell, who does Grand Canyon, and then
So that's a pre-conference?
main conference.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
just,
good.
just 30-minute lecture on Thursday for that, and then a 30-minute lecture on just EMS, medical decision making, and error reduction.
Okay, cool.
Heuristics of decision making and things. And so, yeah. But you'll be down there Wednesday, you said?
Yeah, Wednesday afternoon,
Okay.
fly in.
Cool. Okay. Are you staying here, or then are you staying close? Do you live close here?
Yeah, I live in Portland, so
Okay.
I'll be there Sunday, Monday, Tuesday night.
Okay.
I mean, I have a shift Monday night
Mhm.
shift Monday.
Oh yeah.
Always good that I get that in right before a trip.
Oh yeah. Gotta love night shifts.
I'm
yeah,
not
this has
loving
been
them
amazing.
anymore.
What's that?
I'm not loving them
Oh,
anymore.
I was just joking. Yeah, I can't wait.
Does
to
your group have age?
No, we only have 5-6 people, so it's like no way for.
Yeah.
We've got one of our older part-time docs that just does day shift.
So that's enough for single coverage?
Then we do a little bit of double coverage, yeah. So we've got 5 or 6 full-time and then a couple part-time.
Those 12 hours?
Yeah, mostly. And then we, like in several, we do 3 to 11 double coverage. We do another doc or PA and we run the mountain clinic as well. So we can do a doc, PA, or PA with a doc.
Wow. So how many shifts is like full time?
About 10 and then 12 a month.
That's a good load.
Yeah. Trying to find that transition strategy. Not work full-time clinically, but still do all the fun play things.
Yeah, do they have like a strategy for you to wind down?
Not really. I mean, like one of our, like I'm second senior, so our most senior partner, our group director right now, he's on a 3-year exit strategy. So we've got a new partner that's coming in, and so we've got a 3-year partner track. Still a little old school, but it's working well for us to weed out some people that we've had come through this.
Like who would you? Who wouldn't know exactly what they're getting into there for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a sacrifice to kind of look at Jackson for, but
Really?
we really want to go there. Yeah, because we've had a lot of other docs in the community just not staying. I mean, spouse issues, can't sell a house in myself, it's just cost of living. and they just-
I mean, the reputation was like there was no turnover there.
I mean, for ER, we're pretty stable,
Yeah,
but
okay.
other docs in the community,
Yeah.
like they can't get a surgeon, another surgeon in there now. But yeah, ER, we've been very stable. Good.
Yeah.
Good place to
Imagine.
practice.
Yeah. She's there.
Yeah, so we've got a good comparative on some other places. Are you teaching anything?
Wound care,
Oh, okay, cool.
the two.
What are you doing? Just suturing?
Suturing, staples. It's mostly like, my thing is like, what wound, same thing in the ER, is what wounds you don't close.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest, you know, because I see so many, but it was a clean wound. But you started in, so my thing is like, if you close a wound and then put them on antibiotics, you should never, if you're that worried about it, you should never close it. Because there's always delayed primary closure,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
you know. And on your leg, it's, oh yeah, over the drain, but it's like, I know the patient's unsatisfied, but I mean, I just seen enough messed up
Oh, yeah.
wounds that were clean, you know, totally clean.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like the shin, I mean, the shin is just been
Yeah.
amazing.
That's just irrigation. That's the big thing.
Yeah, but in some just, I mean, you're just filleted open. Compartments are exposed. Just leave it for a couple of days and then close it up.
Cool.
So,
All right. Thanks for having me.
all right, what do you got? I'm just gonna be attending, or are you gonna go ski?
No, I've got to fly back tomorrow morning, so I'm
Take a ski.
hanging around this afternoon and do my wilderness medicine for Thompson.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Cool. Good to see you.
Cool, all right, see you here, thanks for coming,
Yeah,
really.
definitely. See you in San Diego. Problem solving that.
Yeah, I heard it died
Yeah,
last
weird because it like wigged out once and then he plugged it back in, but that wasn't going again. So
Was it through this guy?
no, it was maybe it was Pearce's, but he had another dongle and that was different.
Yeah, because these cords are kind of janky. I mean, they don't sit really nicely.
Until I get it was tight.
These were like VGA convert. Like, they're so reliable. No,
I do have
yeah. I mean, you can
something
even
there. Yeah,
you can
wiggle.
even tell it's
Cheap version.
I'll mess with it.
Do you have another HDMI cable?
Actually, I might in my car.
I was gonna say I might have one in my presenting bag.
Yeah, it's not the most reliable.
Yeah. Don't
But-
breathe. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, that's what during Jody's speech, we had a couple guys who were here and were like, your job is to make sure no one bumps out.
yeah.
But cool, awesome. Well, if I need it, I might track you down, but
Okay.
I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
I'll look and just let you know if I do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you get the laptop?
So it's coming through. It's definitely not a great.
You are engaging with them and you're building that relationship. You try to find commonalities. So where are you from? Spokane. You know, I've been through there once. Man, did I have a bad experience there. I hope that our experience here today is better than when I had there, because that was really bad. But we can get through this. Okay? So I've made her laugh. I've made a connection. I've talked about how what we're in is, you know, this is processable. We can processable. It's not a word. We can get through this together, and then we try to find some commonalities. And one thing that I might do is this sounds a little silly. And if it's forced, it's going to feel really weird. But I try to use their name a lot. California, where are you from? Wait, what's your name?
Emily.
Emily, my name's Pearce. And Emily, I just want to tell you that all these people, when they heard that Emily was on the mountain, we were like, oh, we're going to go get her. We're going to bring her home. So Emily, we called your family. We told them that we found you. We know where you're at. Be a few hours, but we, you know, your dad Bob, he was worried about you. We said, hey, Emily's doing fine. And you know, she's got her dog with her, and the dog's fine too. And we got her warmed up. She's getting some food, and he said, you know, Emily really likes candy when she's distressed. So we brought you some candy. Did you want a piece?
Yeah,
I've used her
definitely.
name 7 times. Okay, in 4 minutes, I've used her name 7 times. Mostly organically, a little forced from the lecture, but you can see that engagement and the name use of the names can really build up that relationship, and we're establishing trust. When I was talking to, Sarah, thank you, and I talked about what my role identification was as far as I am your personal tenant. All these people are here for you, but I am especially here for you. I've identified myself as I'm the go-to person for her, and so we've established that connection. That's all really important in the environment. That's important in the ER. Okay, that's important when you're rounding, when you see a patient, you talk about who you're going to be, is establishing that connection. Because, you know, oh, Friday I'm going to rotate off service and start nephrology. Well, I may never see Ms. Smith again, but when you establish a connection that I'm going to come back and check on you later today, people begin to look forward to that. They know what to expect. And it's those expectations and having them that help mitigate stress injury formation. Last one in the connection phase is, and I talked to this with Emily, is reaching out. So I reached out with Sarah, and we talked, and I shook my hand, and that's a different type of reaching out. What I'm talking about is removing ourselves from the environment by reaching out to the outside world. So I told her that I talked to her dad, Bob. I said, Bob was concerned about you. I know that Bob's your dad, so there she sees we've had a personal connection outside the world. We're going to get you a sat phone so you can talk to him too, because we're probably going to be here for a few hours. And I know he'd really like to hear your voice, okay? By allowing her to connect outside of the realm of this injury and this trauma, she is now herself removing herself from the event and from the environment and allowing herself to have less formation of stress and stress injury. So that's super helpful, allowing them to connect to the outside world. One of the other ones is pets. You know, sometimes pets can get in the way of an injury. But if they are there, it's great to engage them and have them with the person they belong to. the two of them will be better served if possible. So just consider that. I've got a great picture of my dog, which would be great for the slides, but you can't see it. All right. Hope. Remember when I talked about safety? You got a question?
I just want to point out we're a little bit over time, so if
Okay.
anybody's getting really hungry, they can go and the rest of us can hang out.
Give me 2 minutes for hope. I hope that you can hang on for 2 minutes. Okay. Outlook is everything. So you've created safety, connection, efficacy, all of those things, but you want to try to find the positives of the situation. That happens with all those other steps, but focusing on the positive and reminding them of the hope. This happens both for the patient and for the rescuers. When they were leaving the scene, and I can tell them the avalanche is over, the patient is safe, we're going to move on to our next rescue, our training next week. They are now looking forward to the future, not dwelling on the past, and we've established a future hope that's coming that may or may not be as significant as you want it to be, but you're looking forward to that as a technique to help them have something to grab onto that's not the actual event. Okay, so safety, calm, connection, engagement, or efficacy, and hope. If you can remember those things, they're just tools in the toolbox, but just know that mitigating stress injury formation is going to help yourselves, your teammates, and your patients from leaving the scene at the scene and being able to be functional and less impaired going forward for the next rescue. So, thanks very much for your time and attention.